I'll continue to add. Jeev, do you want to go first?
Sure. I don't really have any slides or a presentation. I just have like I just have some code to share and just kind of wanted to talk about like our use case and how we can, think about integration into Flyte. So I'll share my screen real quick here. All right, can you guys see this? So essentially, we have a particular use case where we might have external sort of research collaborators or just data providers essentially updating or uploading data into our buckets that we make available to them. And then when when this data lands, we want to kick off ingest pipelines that then does some transformation and then loads this data into our internal databases, which is then available to research. So that is like one of the use cases of a event-based workflow trigger. And another use case is also that in our production pipeline where we have lab instruments. So we are a biotech company and we've got a wet lab and what I call a dry lab component to our company, and dry lab being like bioinformatics and software engineering and all of that. And so when data, when samples, patient samples pass through the wet lab, they go into these different machines, and these different machines generate data, and all of this data, which is essentially in the form of files, gets uploaded into GCS, and that is what we use to trigger off like our production pipeline, basically. And so here's two different cases that are pretty relevant, I think, to Freenome and potentially to other biotech companies as well, where you have external systems basically dumping data into the cloud and then triggering off like some sort of a transformation of this data, right? So one thing that this was something that was like kind of inspired by Argo events, if you guys have heard of it, and it's just like when an event comes in from GCS, right? So in GCS or S3, you can do this thing where you listen to object notifications, essentially. And so in GCS, we're kind of like doing the same, and we get object notifications via Google PubSub. And so like, it doesn't matter what the pipe is that feeds you these events, but like, we have, I just built this like very quick prototype of, a router that can respond to these events, essentially. So if you got an event that basically had the object path in it, you can define a router where you specify the certain conditions. Like, so in this case, I've specified ham equals to the fact that this object, this particular object exists for two different objects. And when when a path comes in that matches any one of these patterns, it extracts these attributes and then maps them into like both of these different patterns, and then checks to see if those files exist. And if those files exist, it then runs this callback. And this callback, can do a bunch of different things, right? It's basically Python, so you can use it to trigger off like Flyte workflows. You can use it to like send messages. You can use it to do whatever. And so so that's kind of like what this in essence is. And I can for the sake of like a live demo here, I don't have much, and so like I've kind of mocked out my object store, and so my object store is essentially this set over here, and my object exists is basically the fact that this path exists in this object store, which is pretty lame, I admit, but like just for the sake of for demo. And so like if I go ahead and I run this, you can see that like when this event drops, it checks to see that this file matches one of these patterns, right? So in this case, it matches this ham file text, and then it extracts this category and UID and it applies it to this thing, and it checks to see if like those files exist. And so that's basically what this thing is doing here is object. So these two files exist in the object store, and so the callback fires. I can also comment this out, and so like that file doesn't exist in the object store, and if I run it again, basically nothing happens. And so that's kind of like the idea here. So when one of these file drops, nothing happens. When this other file drops, and when both of these files do exist now, this callback fires. And so this is kind of like a very arbitrary, super early stage prototype. And so what we're basically thinking is that we could potentially use this just like a library, right? So we can make this router, give it the ability to listen to like PubSub or S3 or whatever, and then you can just like just do something like a router start or router listen, and then it'll just respond to events using callbacks. And you can just define these callbacks fairly easily using Python decorators. So that would be one way to kind of do this. I think a really nice way to do it would be to kind of define them as Kubernetes objects like CRDs, and have an operator that can like that can basically like register these triggers and listen to them and respond to them as these events come in and pubs up. And so that's basically what Argo events does, right? So like in Argo events, like all of these registrations are basically like CRDs. And so I think that'd be a really nice thing to have for Flyte. And Ketan mentioned, like when I brought this idea up, Ketan mentioned that like, why not just use Argo events? I think Argo events for our purpose was really heavyweight. It's got like a lot of stuff. It requires like, you know, a ton of, basically the entire Argo ecosystem to be up and running to be able to use Argo events. And I didn't want to go down that path of like setting that up when we were using Flyte, and you know, we just wanted something simple that could like respond to events coming from CS. And we didn't need like, you know, all these other webhook sensors and like all the other stuff. But you know, it could be really nice if this was something that we can, you know, add to Flyte, and then it would make sense. Like we're in the same ecosystem, it makes sense to just use something that works really nicely and seamlessly with Flyte. So that's basically what I have. I'm happy to like share. I can share this code on Flyte general if anyone wants to kind of like take a look at it and see how I was messing around with it.
No, please do. I think we've internally also talked about this for a while. Like I think I personally have said that I do not like the sensors that, like, you know, for example, Airflow has. That we're running it on a schedule and waiting for a file to arrive. This is essentially a reaction, right? And a reaction is a much more natural way of solving a problem, like where things arrive asynchronously.
Yeah.
So we have talked about this. We have a few ideas. We did see Argo event, so I didn't know the overlap, like how much does it, like what are the problems with it or so on. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't solve it yet. We might, you know, if Argo events exist, why not use it with them? If it solves the problem, if not, then we should innovate and, you know, probably solve the problem in a much more scalable and better way. But I think this is definitely a problem that I am interested in. I would like to see if the, you know, rest of the folks are. At some point, I'll start writing something down, and whatever you have, Jeev, I would love to collaborate and see if we can, you know, come up with the right set of requirements, the base set of requirements for such a thing.
Yeah,
would love to.
I'm definitely happy to share the requirements that we have as a biotech company, but I'm sure like others.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of these requirements within Lift too, especially with and some of them are with data, right? And some of them are with machine learning, and they're kind of different in times. Like one of the requirements that I've heard in the past is that we want to fire a workflow when another workflow finishes.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so those are like, you know, then the eventing system needs to be really nicely decoupled and yet scalable. It needs to scale to the same level as Flyte, right? And just having one operator, as we've seen, is not enough, at least for us. So I would love to get those ideas and you know, we can work together on this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would love to. In fact, like I think the thing that you mentioned where we have one workflow trigger another workflow is also one of our use cases. So
yeah,
that's perfect.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's Hive partitions or whatever, right? You know, BigQuery tables getting updated. I'm sure that's a requirement for Spotify, or at least for us it is. So
yeah, cool. Yeah, so that's kind of all I have. It's very underwhelming, but I'm happy to like discuss more offline on Slack.
Hey, dude, nothing's underwhelming. Like it's like ideas start like really small, and that's how they need to, you know, germinate. You need to water them, and they'll grow. So this is awesome. Cool. We actually have something, so I wanted to. That's why I have this, and we can start a collaborative doc on this.
Perfect. Yeah. Do you guys have any docs that you're willing to share on this, like kind of early thoughts or whatever? I'd love to kind of read and think about.
Yeah,
see what your guys.
An older doc. We'll talk about it internally, and like it's probably was very embedded in Lift. We are trying to get it out. Let's see. But
sounds good.
Maybe I'll rewrite some parts of it. Okay.
Cool. All right. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Gleb, do you want to go?
Yes. Can you see my screen? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm one of the developers for FlyteKit in Java and Scala, and I will present our recent work. Mainly, I will present about testing support, but I will also touch features that we have added recently. I will do like a quick refresher on Java SDK itself, and I will provide code examples in Scala, but you can do exactly the same in Java if you like Java. So this is like a simple workflow that computes Fibonacci numbers. It uses a task that does sum, and by composition, it computes the Fibonacci numbers, where in Fibonacci sequence, number is equal to the sum of previous two numbers. So it would be 1, 1, 2, etc. This is the most simple workflow. I guess you can write if you don't want to do any side effects. And we often use it as an examples. And all the code that I will present today, you can find in open source repository. So if you want to declare a task, you would normally, if you use Scala, you would declare case classes, easier inputs and outputs. And you write a function that takes an input and produces an output. What we added recently is support for launch plans. For that, you basically add a class, you extend a base class, and we have a special function if you want to register default launch plans. So default launch plans in Flyte, they just have the same name as the workflow, and they don't have any schedule. But if you want, you can also add more launch plans. So let's say in this case, we will scale our Fibonacci workflow to be executed daily. If you want to provide inputs, so we want to always start with Fibonacci sequence with 1 and 1. And you can also specify cron schedule. So if you use, let's say, AWS, you would use Cloud Scheduler, and it would trigger workflows in Flyte. And this is truly declarative. So the moment you call this function, registration doesn't actually happen. It will happen during the time when you would use CLI and call register. We did not present this feature, but on the last meeting, we have seen how you can do fast registration in Python SDK. We can do exactly the same in Scala or Java SDK. It's actually the most developed method, so it was the first method that existed. The way it works, it will copy jars to cloud storage, let's say S3 or GCS, and it does rsync. So it doesn't copy jars if they're already copied. So it will basically append checksum into the end of the file name, and if file already exists and checksum match, it wouldn't upload it again. So when I tried it on my machine, it took me 1 second to do incremental compilation for my Scala code. It was a small project. And then it took me 4 seconds to do fast registration. So it's a pretty good development cycle. Something else, we put a lot of attention to this in Java SDK execution. If you want to get started with it, you don't have to have a backend, or you don't have to have a Flyte service. You can just start using SDK, and you can trigger workflows locally. In this case, you don't have access to operators, or you cannot use Python tasks. But if your workflow is self-contained and everything is implemented in Java, you can do that. There's also a pretty on it, mainly to start say you have a workflow that does some critical workload to compute the answer to life and universe and everything else. So there is no way how local execution agent can run this task, because it can use like some operator, or the code can be implemented in Go. To fix this, we have a way how you can provide basically custom implementations for this task. So in this case, we have a, you can basically mock, you can either mock specific input output, or you can mock the whole implementation. And then you can run it locally, and then you can test your workflow like this. We also did a few other improvements. If you use Java, you would like it a lot because we basically supported Jackson annotations. So you can rename, you can map between different types, etc. So it gives the same level of support we have in Scala right now with case classes and implicits. Plus, we supported more Flyte SDK features. So for instance, we have support for task level retries. You can define it. And to get better support for testing, but as well as a nice side effect, now we have a, some subset of built-in type checker. So the reason for that, the moment type don't match, let's say you refer to something that doesn't exist, or you use the wrong type, or you have a cycle somehow, it would throw an exception with a stack trace pointing to the exact line where the problem happened. And it significantly improves developer experience because you basically can see the moment of your code where things went wrong, and you don't have to search through the logs and then try to connect it to your code and actually understand when something wrong happened. So that's it.
Are you going to demo something? Or maybe just point people to the code path, I guess.
Yeah, you can find all the code from this presentation on GitHub.
Yeah. So in the notes, Gleb, if you can add your slides and the presentation, or to the, I'll add a link to FlyteKit Java, so that way, you know, people can go and start trying to produce it. I wanted to add a side note. It works on AWS as well, and so we've tested it. Like I think I'll do a round of test again. And then we can say that if there are people that who want to use also. I know there were some teams who wanted to use. So yeah, Gleb is like been amazing. It's just completely built this. Like one day he suddenly came and was like, I wrote this entire SDK in Scala. I'm like, what the heck? And it's been amazing to see the progress. And they run it in production, right?
Yes, so this workflow produces very important numbers. So yeah, it's reliable. You can use it in production. If you find anything, it's likely going to be that some feature is missing. It's not a bug in existing feature. If you also don't use Flyte in production, if you just have some trainer orchestration engine, you can get your easy way to Flyte just by using it in local mode, and then get the full power of the whole system.
I think the local mode is very critical. I think in Python, for some reason, that was missing, and so with the new SDK version, right, that's going to be that is the focus. And I think this probably brings more parity to the Java and the Flyte SDK, and they kind of look similar. Like there's unit testing, there's mocking, and so that's amazing. That actually shows that this probably is the right way to move ahead. So that's awesome. Anybody had questions? Gleb, I had a question. How many, all the types included or implemented rather, or only a subset right now?
So we have basically two layers of support. The first one is like SDK has nice features to make it comfortable to use something. Let's say has a built-in support to open files, like if you read blobs, etc. So it doesn't exist for blobs and for schemas, but there is like a second layer when you basically have like lower level API, and this layer exists. So it might be not the best user experience if you want to support this, but also it's pretty straightforward to add. We just don't have a use case for it yet, and we don't want to add something that is not used. But if you have a use case for it, let me know.
Yeah. In the Python thing, so like we should demo that thing again because it's progressed more, but not now, maybe in the next one. One of the things that we made, and I think I talked about this last time, is we realized that we want to add new types in the user space that map to the underlying type system in Flyte. And I think that's because, for example, schema itself could be represented using pandas data frame or Spark data frames or some other data frames, as well as users usually, and like in some other fields, there are way more complicated types that we probably don't even know, but they usually map into like some binary protocol or some files. So that's one of the reasons why we added like an internal registration thing that just registers a type, which basically allows you to convert any type to an internal representation. And it's just essentially a decorator. So you can write it as much, or you can use the base underlying core concepts to directly access. And so I think it's similar to what you have done. So that's perfect. Anything else? Any other questions anybody has?
Yeah, one question. Can you hear me? My connection is a little bit flaky.
You can hear you.
So what I wanted to ask, okay, great, about Scala versions because of binary compatibility. So can I write workflows and tasks in, or which Scala versions are supported, and how does it work when I switch between like to 12 and to 13, or in the future to Scala 3?
So it's a great question. So in general, I'll start with a more generic problem. So in Java, there is a problem with the jar hole that you cannot have two versions of the same classes on a class. Actually, you can formulate it differently. You cannot have it on the same class folder. So in Java, there is actually a concept of a class folder that is like a unit of isolation. So what we do, we actually have multiple class folders per different task. So in general, and our SDK doesn't have any dependencies at all. So even like a Jackson one, it's like an optional module you can pull in or you don't. So we didn't even use Guava, for instance, because we didn't want to have any dependency. And Guava is like super popular Java library, everyone uses. And the drawback of using Guava, because there are sometimes breaking changes in Guavas, and then everything just breaks. So in our case, basically each task can have own class path. So let's say you use something like a Spark or some like Apache Beam or something else. And you can basically have different tasks that use different frameworks. And let's say you also use Spark, and Spark has, let's say, Scala 2.12 dependency. And then you want to have Scala 2.13 or Scala 3, let's say. Scala 3 is coming in some other task. You can actually mix it. You just need to be a bit careful with how you package it. And also, let's say you have a GCS, so actually GCS connector is needed because you need to upload jars to GCS, you need to read data from GCS, etc., right? So it's extra class path. We actually isolate this code that does I/O through GCS into separate class folder in a way that there is no way how it can interact with your code. So our SDK is truly like zero dependency, basically. So you can work around all these class path issues.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really great for like long-term stability, I guess. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, other benefit that actually due to fast registration, and it's like a default way we use it, you can swap containers. So you don't have to actually worry and package containers. So you have your code, you have your jars, like let's say on some file system, and then you have a base image, a container. One of the ways to use it, you can just swap containers. So an example, let's say you want to install a security update for JDK. So you don't really want to rebuild each Docker image you published. What you can do, you can take the class path that already published and just swap base image. So it also, like, if you have many things you have built historically, it actually simplifies maintenance. So you don't have to rebuild a bunch of stuff and make sure it's upgraded, etc.
That's awesome.
Yeah. If there's a new or there's a security patch in the JRE or something like that. I think that will be handy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, even in the Python side, we are now we added support for multiple images. One of the reasons was that you could start off with just having some set of base images, and both like Java and Python, you could write those examples without even trying to build a Docker container. At least in the beginning, I still want people to build Docker containers in production, but yeah, in the beginning, it's like so much better. And I think our inspiration came from Gleb's work essentially. So. That's awesome. Thank you, Gleb. So, Soren, are you guys using would you be using the Java SDK or the Python?
I guess we will be using both because we have, I mean, we actually provide this we have actually customers who are using this, and there's just different use cases, for the data engineering part. There's just more people using like JVM languages, and for the more data science heavy things, of course, Python is the choice for most. So I guess we're interested in both. We will start with Python, but we really want to introduce the Scala and Java one as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's what's happening on our side too. I think one of the updates that we want to do in the documentation is like, and I think we discussed this, I guess Gleb and I discussed about this some time ago, but our documentation's not good, and we completely understand. And so one of the things that we are working on is updating FlyteKit Python and FlyteKit Java, right? Both of them are now kind of getting to a state where they're ready. The way we think that they're getting started is essentially you pip install or you Maven install the dependencies, and you write code, run them locally, test it out, get your hypothesis, get happy with it, right? And then you install Flyte, and hopefully that's also pretty straightforward. And then you install, once you're happy with your local Flyte, then you install Flyte in a cluster, and we'll move on. So that way we can decouple the user behavior, which is you don't have to think about Flyte, the backend stuff at all. You just have to think about the user land, which is both the SDKs. And hopefully now that there's so much parity between both, that we can actually give them side-by-side examples. Oh, this is in Python and this is in Java. Choose your language. That would be ideal. I think there will remain some differences. It's just the nature of those two languages. But still, I think this is awesome. Really excited.
Yeah, I think there could be room for showcases with workflows using both, where both different languages have their strengths, and then in the Flyte you can use them together. I think this would be a great showcase actually.
Yeah. I think that's, like for example, I actually think that some things will be written in Spark, probably in Java or Scala, and then other things can still continue to use Python for doing their things, and that'll work absolutely fine if we do this right. And I think that the pieces are there. We probably need to rethink about the schema type. If anybody has any ideas on how to rethink about schema, please, all ears. We will continue with the current version, but I think we will put that on a deprecation path and improve, or not deprecation, but an improvement path rather. So if you have ideas how you think schema should evolve, one of the things that I would like to do is multidimensional schemas, which we don't support today, right? It's only two-dimensional, not even complex objects are supported within the schema, which is, I think, a problem. A tensor is a better thing than just like a two-dimensional row. But yeah, so if you have ideas, bring it up. I would love to and contribute to schema. It's an idea that started off, which has taken its own life. We're gonna give it wings, hopefully. Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? If not, I'll give a quick update on milestone 10. So we are in milestone 10. This last 2 months, we've become a little not clear about like the end of the month. And that's because we're still working on FlyteKit Python. We did release version 9. There are a few very good features in the console and whatever, but we did not a huge ton of features. I think the milestone 10 is what we are really getting towards, which is hopefully the end of the year, which we want to add a bunch of, include FlyteKit Java, improve some documentation, and have FlyteKit Python documentation with the new version. All of that is getting towards milestone 10, which is the 1 more month from now. It says that it should be released like now, but we will change that deadline to end of this month. And we're sorry that for the last 2 months we've been a little off, but I think if everybody sees the reason is because we think that there is a value add that we can do at every milestone. And I think milestone 10 we can celebrate the end of the year with milestone 10. So. And another thing is that we're working on with Lyft on seeing how to donate Flyte to Linux Foundation. And so there will be updates on that in the future calls. And so if you might see some changes within namespaces and so on, and that might be a little bit of a thing that you should be cognizant about. But we think that going to Linux Foundation is the right way so that everybody can contribute easily and we can create a proper project namespace for Flyte, and you can add all of these other projects that we work on as independent incubating entities within that project. So,
does anybody have any concerns about that? We think that's the right thing to do for the community, but we want to make sure that that's makes sense to everybody else.
I think personally, as a company that's building like a FDA validatable product, I think that that would be pretty amazing for us.
Okay.
Awesome, great.
I mean, we think it's pretty obvious and the right thing to do. It worked for Envoy, it worked for Odmanson, 2 other big open source projects at Lyft, and they've been pretty happy with Linux Foundation as a home. And the governance is, we think it's pretty clear and pretty straightforward. If anybody has concerns about it, they got a bunch of documentation about how projects are governed, but it's very much, the project sort of decides its own governance, and the main rule is that it's written down and that it's peer driven. It's not controlled by any one company. So that's what Ketan is currently working on with the folks at Lyft. So if anybody is not happy about that, let us know right away. If you are happy about it, then we'll probably ask for your support soon.
Yeah, I think one thing is like we'll need support because for no reason it doesn't. I think Lyft is 99% supportive, but there could be that 1% case where they might be like, oh, we don't want to move it, we want to control the project, right? And then we'll have to decide an alternative in that path. But at the moment, I don't think we have to recourse to that thought process at all. But other than that, we are going to move hopefully to Linux Foundation. It's not going to be part of CNCF, but an alternate umbrella. And we will be creating a steering committee consisting of the various folks who are part of these calls regularly. And there will be different layers, like there will be maintainers and contributors and committers. So thank you for you joining in. This is amazing. We feel humbled, and yeah, we would love to. I think 2021 is going to be amazing. So we have one more of these in this year. Let's conclude that with hopefully the good news of us moving into LF with the timeline. So
cool. All right, if that's it, I think we'll call it today. We'll be switching all the videos to YouTube unless anybody has any objections to that, instead of the MP4s. Anybody doesn't like that, DM me. But otherwise, all the links will just go to YouTube from here on out. So. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, there is a chat. Yeah, there's a channel in YouTube. You can search for Flyte.org, I think, and I think it shows up. But all of the videos we're posting there, it's easier to discover, I think.
All right. See everybody in a couple weeks. Have a good holiday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Don't try a little more.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.